First things first, Phil, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you doing, Robert?
I'm not too bad. I'm not too bad at all. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us. So before we get into the new Last in Line album, Jericho, I would like to start kind of a little bit in the beginning because I read something which I found very interesting. I think it was an interview with Andrew where he talked about the musical DNA that some people in the band had because of where they grew up and all the things that they've experienced. So that concept of musical DNA, where did that start for you?
The concept of musical DNA, I guess, as far as I'm concerned,
Yes.
I think is was classical music. I mean,
Okay.
I was playing instruments from when I was a very young age, and eventually studied classical violin for many years and
Okay.
classical theory studies and four part harmony, that kind of stuff, music theory. And it was probably, I don't know, 11 years old when I really started messing around with guitars and bass, electric instruments. Prior to that, I played, the typical instruments that kids would play, recorders
Sure.
and harmonicas and all of those things, melodicas, um, whatever I could get my hands on. I had a cousin there, my mom's cousins, who were a little bit, obviously quite a bit older than me. And they bought me a real wooden guitar when I was maybe
Okay.
about 4 years old. And so this was always kicking around my room, and I was always trying to play it and trying to figure out how it worked. So I suppose that's my background. As far
Sure.
as the DNA goes, I think really what that applies to, what I interpret that as is really the DNA of Last in Line, meaning to say that uh, when they were, in the original Dio band, which was of course, Vinny and Vivian together
Sure.
with late Jimmy Bain and Ronnie James Dio, there was that kind of chemistry. And any band that is formed after that is going to retain some of those
Mm.
characteristics.
And that's an interesting point then, because when you joined this group of people, what did you feel you could contribute to what was already there?
Well, the situation was that Jimmy, who was a dear friend of mine as well, had
Mm.
passed away, unfortunately, before the album was released, or just before it was released. And so there were some commitments to do some live shows. And that was really the only plan at that time.
Okay.
Vinny and Vivian said to me, "Look, we have these gigs that we have to do. And would you want to do these with us? Would you help us doing them?" And I said, "Sure." And at the time, I think that was really the extent of
Okay.
what we were going to do. It wasn't until we went out on the road and started playing, I think, that we realized that there was some very good chemistry in the band, and
Mm.
uh, there was a great spirit. And eventually, the subject came around to maybe we should continue this, and how would we feel about continuing the project, working perhaps on a new record, etc., etc. So
Mm.
initially it wasn't, hey, what are you going to contribute and what can you bring to the table? It was just, can we finish these gigs? And when I went out and did those gigs, um, my goal was really to try to channel Jimmy. I
Mm.
wanted to play the parts as Jimmy played them, as he would have played them, and as he actually did on the record. So really, I was trying to strip myself a little bit out of it, and I was trying to just pay tribute to Jimmy because
Sure.
that's what people wanted to hear.
Yeah, and obviously the what happened was quite tragic, and the way kind of that all thing went, and how you joined the band. But what was there a moment then? Maybe I don't know if it was writing for number two or when it was, but where you felt okay, I can show a little bit more of myself then within the band and within the music.
Yes, I think that's exactly when it was. When we
Okay.
started doing the two album, at that point, what I was doing was allowing myself to uh, to do what I felt like doing, exact 100%. Not that I didn't feel like playing the right parts that Jimmy had played before, because I got a lot of pleasure in doing that as well. Jimmy was a terrific bass player. He really was.
Sorry to interrupt. Very very quickly. What made him so special as a bass player then?
Oh, I think he was an all round musician. I mean, it's very well publicized that he had his challenges in later years with, um, you know, marching to the beat of his own drum, shall we
Mm.
say. But in prior years, I don't know if you know, he was a great singer. He was a great keyboard player. He was a great guitar player. He was a great bass player. So he was an all-round musician, and he had a terrific sense of melody and of commercial what worked. He
Mm.
knew what worked, and going back to even the Rainbow album and stuff. I mean, this playing on that was just terrific.
Right.
Of course, the early Dio, the first two or three Dio albums, the ones that we talk about all the time. I mean, there's some stuff on there that the track "Last in Line." I often say, I wish I'd written that bass line. That's an incredible bass line. I mean, it really
Mm.
takes some kind of vision to write that kind of stuff and put that kind of unique spin on things. I love bass players who um, are able to bring more to the table than just sitting down there playing a rhythmic single note or root notes. I modeled myself after
Yeah.
classical bass, which was, if you want, is figured bass. So the bass moves in in complement to the melody, and so there is a melodic component as well as a rhythmic component. And you hear this in bass players like, of course, Paul McCartney's great at that.
Mm.
You know,
Sure.
I mean, these are the bass players I think that I always strive to be more like. I love people like um, I loved Andy Fraser very much. And currently, I've always loved people like Tony Levin, and I
Mm.
like all of these guys who have a slightly different spin. Pino Palladino is another great bass
Mm.
player. As with all the typical influences, the Stanley Clarks and the Jaco
Sure, sure,
Pastorius,
sure.
John Paul Jones, and et cetera, et cetera. So
No, but that's interesting that you say that because obviously you've had quite a successful solo career as well, and then you weren't at all one-dimensional. So does that help in terms of songwriting then? The fact that you can be in a room with people and everybody kind of knows what the other is doing and why they do it?
yeah, I think it does. I think it's a really good exercise for people to learn a little bit of other instruments, just
Right.
so that they have an idea of what the mindset is. Maybe it also helps being a producer, because as a producer, um, you do have to understand what everyone's trying to do,
Mm.
and you have to appreciate what people are playing. Um, Most of the time, I think when you get into above a certain level of playing, you're actually doing more listening than you're doing playing. You're
Mm.
listening to what everyone else is doing. Yeah, I often say that it's a little bit like a conversation. You could put four people in a room. If they all talk over each other, it's just a mess. You have to listen, and you have to respond, and you have to be in keeping. And it's the same for music as well.
Is that why it's so important for Last in Line to be in the same room together when writing and to kind of have that somewhat jam-like those jam-like sessions to spark creativity?
Yes, it absolutely helps. I mean, especially with the philosophy that this band has of wanting to write things together, being able to sit in a room, having somebody play something, and having another person pick up on what they're playing and do something complementary. That is priceless.
Mm.
Um, we have gotten used to a different way of working these days, where people have home studios like my studio here,
Sure.
and they sit around and they write basically demos, and they bring a demo in and say, hey, this is what I have, and everybody listens to everybody's demos, and they pick which songs they want to work on, and it's almost like a compilation of solo projects. But really what you want to do is you want to say, hey, why don't we sit in the room with nothing, and we'll start playing with ideas and see what naturally what people pick up on naturally. And that
Yeah,
really is the most granular way of doing this, because that's about the purest influence that you're going to get of four people working ideas together.
yeah, because I suppose then you don't have a preconceived notion of where you want it to go, so it's much more open in a way.
Yeah, it's very difficult to write things with a preconceived notion of what you want without it sounding, sounding, um, uh, you know, I hate to use the word fake, but fake,
Sure.
because you don't write a song and say, well, I want to write a song and I want it to be a number, X single, and I want it to sound like this, and I think it should sound like that, and it starts to sound very formula.
Mm.
Yeah, you just write songs and then you see how they come out, and they are what they are. And it's a little bit like, I suppose, somebody has a child. I mean, they have a child, it's going to be the way it's going to be, and that is it. And it's very unique, and it's very individual, and you know.
But obviously, the four of you, all, and then everybody who was associated with the band previously, have had these illustrious careers in music. So I suppose you do have some sense of what makes a good song or what makes a.
No, I have no idea. I really don't. I'm not joking. I don't know. I don't know what. I still don't know. Lots of debates. Lots of people say, "Oh, here's what a great song is. Here's what a great single is. Here's what it takes." I don't know. We do an album, and very often the two or three songs on the album that I think are going to be the hit singles. We take that album, we send it out to record label people, to our management, to agent, to all of our close friends, and then we get the feedback, and
Mm.
it's invariably the song that everyone picks is not one that I would have thought. So,
Okay.
I don't
That's
know.
very interesting to hear because, well, for instance, you've had a hand in "Shot in the Dark," which is this huge song. So when you were writing that, did you know it was good, or was it like, okay, this is, as you mentioned, this is just what came out and whatever people
Yeah, when I
find in
wrote
it?
it, I mean, I was influenced by a lot of things at the time when I was lots of types of music at the time. I had a lot of influence from jazz, fusion
Okay.
stuff, and um, the, this music was something that these chords were very much taken from. I mean, they were taken from a style of music that I was listening to at the time, which is a lot of Al Jarreau, believe it or not.
Mm. Okay.
And taking those kind of chords and then putting them into a rock context, all of a sudden was unique and different. The song was written. We did a demo of it in a band I was in with Simon Kirk called Wildlife a long, long time ago. And the guys in the band, they didn't like the lyrics.
Okay.
They wanted to rewrite the lyrics, so they wrote some different lyrics. And but we never released it. And then when we moved on, I presented the original song to 3 or 4 projects afterwards. And it wasn't until Ozzy heard
Oh
it and
wow.
said, "Oh, let's do it." So it's funny. The song, sits in the drawer for a long time. You say, "Hey, what about this?" And people say, "Nah, no, I don't think so." And then one day somebody relates to it musically. So, um, it's I don't know. I mean, a very funny story actually, because when I joined Ozzy, and when we had this debate about looking for songs, they felt that they needed another song, and they asked, they considered some covers, and they asked everybody else. Eventually, turned around to Randy Castillo and myself. We were the new guys, and said, "Hey, do you have anything?" And Randy didn't really write as such, and so he didn't. And I said, "Well, I have 3 ideas," and I
Mm.
played the 3 songs, and "Shot in the Dark" was one of them. One of the other ideas I was playing around with in a rehearsal room. And Vivian picked up and I said, "Oh, what's that?" And I said, "No, no, no. It's a very, very old idea. I don't like it very much." "No, no, no. It's really good. We should play on that for it." "No, no. We don't want to do this." And "No, no, no. I think we should play on it." So we played on it, and it turns out to be House Party at the End of the World. It's so funny.
Okay.
I mean, it's 35 years later or whatever it was. So I guess, if you have a good idea, maybe it stimulates somebody else to think of something, and uh, a good idea never goes to waste.
Yeah, that's crazy to hear because yeah, as you kind of mentioned, it just needs the right time for the right ears to hear it, and then it will find a way to what it's supposed to be.
It
That's
is, and
very
it's funny
interesting.
because with that song as well. I mean, you ask the other guys, and several times I've said, "Do we really want to do this?" And they've said, "Yeah, yeah." And I just wasn't crazy about it. I think it was a little bit like, when you look at an old photograph of yourself, and you're
Sure.
like, "Oh gosh, it's terrible," and other people say, "No, it's kind of cool. There's some character there. You can see." But looking at photographs of yourself sometimes is not, you know, you tend to be very critical.
You,
So
you're embarrassed a bit, especially when
exactly,
you yeah. But
yeah.
yeah, it's really cool to hear that songs can last or kind of stay on the shelf for that long and still find a way out. That's very interesting to hear. So talking about the writing then for Jericho, because I believe you already started in 2019, right after the release of two, because you wanted to kind of keep that live element to it. But then obviously, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, no, carry on.
Oh, no, okay. Because then obviously the pandemic hit and everything became a lot more challenging. And you mentioned kind of everybody these days being in their own home studio and writing and then kind of bringing full demos to. So what was it like kind of being forced to do that? And or did you just not write until you could see each other again?
We have sometimes if we're in a sound check, somebody will play something. Vinny will play something. Vivian will play something, and then somebody will join in, and we might capture a little moment, and we might record it. And we sometimes those are the things that we will take into the rehearsal room. So we had a few ideas, and we said we happened to find ourselves in Los Angeles. I think it was January of 2000 and gosh, I can't remember 2020 now, right? Just before the pandemic. And we were in Los Angeles and we said, hey, we've got a couple of days off. Why don't we just pop into a studio just for fun? Maybe we can record a song or two or play around with a couple of ideas. And as it happened, we went into the studio for 3 or 4 days and we put 6 songs down, which was a lot more than we thought we would. And that was a very good thing because during the pandemic, we had these 6 songs to work on. And
right.
that's what we did. So we managed to do the basis of those songs in a room together. And then afterwards, it wasn't until towards the end of the pandemic that we had the opportunity again to get into a room one more time and come up with the other 6 songs.
Right.
But a lot of work was done from home. It was a different way of working. It's probably not my favorite way of working, but it was a different way of working. And we also did the Day in the Life EP as well.
Right.
So that was done during the pandemic.
And you mentioned Paul McCartney earlier. So a day in the life, what role? And this is all probably a silly question to ask a musician, but what role do the Beatles have for you?
A very great role. It's just there's a musicality. There's a crossover to me between. It's just like a foundation. I mean, classically, they did some incredible things. And maybe they didn't even realize it at the time, but they were just a milestone band. I mean, I listened to the Beatles growing up as a kid. My mom loved the Beatles. She would play them all the time. And I very much appreciated the music. And it was some of the earliest stuff I started learning. It was great songs to learn. And something like A Day in the Life, I mean, was every bit as relevant today as it was back then. So, it was my idea that to do a Beatles. We've been talking about doing a cover song for a long time and kicking stuff around. And then I did this idea of doing a Beatles song and I suggested it to the guys. Vinny's a big Beatles fan as well, and as is Vivian and I'm sure Andrew too. And after a little bit of debate, I said, well, let me put something together. I started putting together what I would call a map or a template of how we could do something like this. It's very challenging because you want to pay tribute and respect to the song, and you want to treat it with the correct respect. You still want to put your own spin on it, but you also you don't want to take it away from what was originally there as well.
Sure.
So it's walking a very fine line. I mean, I can see a lot of Beatles fans, if you did something wrong, would be screaming sacrilege. So sure. we wanted to do something in a very complimentary way, as well as being able to put our spin on it. And I love the lyric for that song. I just think it's so relevant today. And as we started assembling it, we started saying, hey, this is actually pretty good. We played it for our record label, and they were the ones who said, "Oh, we should put an EP out with this song."
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. It was their idea.
Well, there's 2 things in what you just said that I find very interesting. The first thing is the notion of timelessness in music, and that for some reason, bands like the Beatles, but also, I mean, Dio is a great example, and those first couple of albums. Is why do you think certain type of music it remains popular no matter people's age, no matter people's backgrounds? It just people can always find something in it. It's maybe too philosophical a question, but do you know, do you have a sense of why certain music is timeless?
I think part of it may be that you strip out, you know, when you write a song from a feeling, you have a sentiment, you have a whatever it happens to be, you know, something that inspires you to write a song. The toughest part for me in writing a song is once you've got this whole story, is to take yourself out of it.
Mm,
And you want to take anything that's personal out of it. And the reason that you want to do this is because you want to leave it as a um, as a piece of art with a placeholder for the person who's listening. So once you write this song and you've removed yourself from it, it allows other people to insert themselves into it and relate to it. And I think the Beatles were really good at doing this kind of thing. So to, you know, in a philosophical way, I think that's really what it is.
mm,
It's a little bit like, you know, if you look at I don't know, if you look at a black and white picture versus a color picture, the color picture is great. There's a lot of factual information there. If you look at a black and white picture, it leaves a certain amount to the imagination.
mm.
The viewer has to fill in the colors as he sees or she sees fit. And once they do that, they take a personal ownership in it. They identify.
Right.
And it's a different experience for every person. I think that's why black and white photographs are so much more interesting to look at than color photographs. You know, color photograph is like, wow, look at that. Black and white photograph is, well, let me look at this and I'm going to create something, my perception of it. And the same thing I think with music. If you can come up with things that have placeholders, that have space in them for you to insert your own experience and find that it relates, I think that's the key to a timeless song.
Yeah, I think that's it's just magical the way certain things can hit you, and as you say, how your mind starts to fill in the blanks in a way. The other thing that you mentioned that I found interesting is when you did a cover of the Beatles, you wanted to do justice to the song, but you also wanted to incorporate your own style and elements into the music.
Yeah.
Is this kind of similarly true when you start, for instance, on the third album, Jericho? Is this similarly true about yourself then, that you want to remain the essence, keep the essence of the band, but you also want to kind of develop in a way, in a sense?
Yeah, well, the essence of the band is going back to the very first thing we talked about, which is the DNA of the band
Mm,
that comes together. There's going to be that is going to be present at all times. What we want to do is then we want to come up with new ideas. We want to push the envelope a little bit,
right.
and we want to try to see, you know, where this journey is taking us. You know, it's very easy for people to make a parallel to the early Dio albums, but those albums were early 80s. That's 40 years ago. I can't believe I'm that old, but it's you know, it's a long time ago. And you know, I don't know what Ronnie would have been doing today if he was alive. I'm sure it would be different from what he was doing back then, or and anybody for that matter.
Right.
So you know, I see, you know, what we're doing as taking it into a, you know, into taking it into a new area. I mean, I brought in my influence in the band is different as well. So
Sure.
I'm going to bring something into the band that wasn't there before. It's like, you know, creating a big bowl of soup. You know, each person brings in certain ingredients, and that's going to change the overall picture. Um, you know, I brought I was very influenced by a lot of post-punk music as well. I mean,
Okay.
I had some very diverse influences, and so I would, you know, I love that kind of bringing that kind of angle into it as well, the kind of Killing Joke and those kind of bands, and you
Right.
know, that's a lot of the heavy bass lines and stuff that I used to love in those bands. You know, I wanted to sort of bring a little bit of that in there. So yeah, different spin, you know.
If we take the album then, is there one song that you're particularly happy with? Obviously you like all of them, but is there one that stands out to you in terms of how it turned out, or where the initial idea started and where it ended up?
Yeah, I think Bastard Son and I think
Okay.
Hurricane Orla are the two that really jump to mind because um, especially Bastard Son, we started playing around with this idea, and it became a little bit of a sort of joke idea. You know, we were messing around with joke lyrics and what have you, and it turned out to be an epic track. um, and one of the um, you know, when I was sitting here working on it, Andrew came over and we were working on some overdubs as well, some kind of sounds, some keyboard ideas and what have you. And I started to really hear this as a bit of a, you know, especially towards the end, as a bit of a sort of like Zeppelin-y kind of Kashmir thing, you know. And it really started to get a spirit of its own. And same with Hurricane. When we did Hurricane Orla, um, you know, we really wanted to um, uh, make this thing sound powerful. And we did a lot of work on background vocals and stuff. There's some incredible vocal textures that's going in there, and that kind of stuff is very gratifying to do as well. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I'm really pleased with the way those two tracks came out. But to be honest with you, I mean, a lot of the record came out really great as well. Some songs, you know, um, you know, I thought Dark Days was probably going to be like a big single to me from the original idea. Yeah, but not everybody thought so in practice. That in actual reality, that's not what happened. So people picked other songs. So again, that's my my perception that I don't really know. You know.
Fair enough, fair enough. Um, when it comes to the themes, then, because Dark Days, I wrote down from that song, all that you got is not what you need. So this is a very, at least the way I interpret it, people today might have distorted priorities in a way, and you can see that kind of if you just look at the world. And there's some other mention of I really like the "We don't run, the age of God is over. I feel it in my soul." There's certain thematic elements. Do you all discuss these elements, or is this mostly Andrew? Well, how does that work?
I think the general discussion is there. You know, I mean, we're very much aware of of how divided the world is right now, not just on a global playing field, but on an individual playing field as well.
Right.
You know, I mean, I just wrote a solo song called "The World Divided." It's about this very same thing. I think we're very, you know, aware of what's going on. We talk about it. It's discussed, and you know, a lot of this album, I think, you know, the overall concept for Jericho is that, you know, it's breaking down the walls.
Mm.
You know, somebody asked me, was it a religious thing? And it's not really it's not a religious thing. But the story of breaking down the walls to get to some better place. And in terms of just dealing with all the challenges that there have been, whether you talk about, you know, global challenges, political challenges, pandemic challenges,
Sure.
You know, difficulty of people being able to do what they used to take for granted.
Yeah.
You know, the liberties, and yeah, we'll go here, we'll go get dinner, we'll go travel here, we'll jump on a plane. All of a sudden, all of those things were taken away. I'm not going to be judgmental about them, but the reality was people's lives had to change,
Sure.
right? And so we tried to say, you know, all of this stuff is one big ball of mess, and we sort of need to kind of break through this and get through this, and you know, and in the hope of finding something better on the other side of the wall. That's what
In terms of music, then, do you think, and that obviously this is different for each song, and maybe depending on the mood you're in as well, but how do you see music in general? Then is it kind of like an escape and a way to kind of step out of those kind of the ills of the world, or do you see it also as a way to kind of get something moving forward, like a lot of the music from the 60s and 70s?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of several different things. I think part of it is an escape, of course. You know, I love losing myself in a
Right.
fantastic album and just being able to sort of like daydream in it. And but I also think there's a therapeutic element to it as well. I think it's important to make people think and to encourage people to think. And in that term, the word provocative comes to mind.
Mm.
You want to provoke something. You want people to hear something and make them think. Make them, you know, something like A Day in the Life. I think it makes people think, you know, and that's why it's a great song. It's um, and you know, a lot of the lyrics that are written, a lot of the lyrics that Andrew's written as well, the way he's kind of um, vocalized this and put it into words, it does make people think.
Sure.
That's what we want to do, you know.
Excellent. I have one last question.
Sure.
I have one last question because you mentioned you just wrote a song for yourself for your solo project. So when can we expect to hear any of that? Is it?
Yeah. I've been releasing on solo songs here and there, but I've been doing them with little videos. I create the videos myself and I put them together. It's a lot of fun to do.
Okay.
And it's just a bit of a pet project. So I need to do a video for this. I'm actually in the middle of planning a video for Bastard Son that we're going to do internally. So that's going to be fun. But this one song is great. Simon Phillips played drums on it. It's
okay.
Simon and Kristen Brady played a guitar solo. I played most of the other instruments. So as soon as I get the video, I'll release it. But the song's done.
Sounds good. Phil, may I thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me.
You are welcome, Robin. It's such a pleasure. And hopefully
thank you so much.
We'll see you in Holland sometime. How about that?